Before we start, make sure to like and subscribe to the channel and leave a comment with where you're from and what time you're watching. That way, YouTube will keep showing you stories just like this one. Now, let's begin. The night was black as coal, the mountains swallowed by a thick blanket of fog. The road twisted like a serpent through the Rockies, and by the time Daniel's car pulled up to the massive white structure of the Stanley Hotel, the moon had completely disappeared behind the clouds. The building loomed ahead like a pale ghost, its windows glowing faintly with warm light, as though it was waiting for him. The wind howled through the valley, carrying with it an unsettling sound, like distant whispers. When Daniel stepped out of the car, he froze. The air was deathly cold, and for a moment he swore he saw a figure standing in one of the top windows of the east wing. It was a woman, her dress old-fashioned, her face pale and blurry. But she was smiling at him. By the time he blinked, the window was empty. He had read about the Stanley Hotel, of course, the place that inspired Stephen King to write The Shining. A playground for ghosts, a sanctuary for spirits that never left. But tonight he wasn't here as a tourist. He was here because he had nowhere else to go. His marriage had fallen apart, his job was gone, and something in him wanted to face the darkness. Inside, the lobby was warm and eerily elegant. Red velvet chairs, grand chandeliers, the smell of polished wood. It felt like stepping back in time. At the reception, a smiling clerk handed him an old brass key. "Room 217, she said. Daniel's blood ran cold. Everyone knew room 217 was the most haunted room in the entire hotel. When he reached the second floor, the hallway stretched long and empty, lined with portraits whose painted eyes seemed to follow him. As he approached room 217, the light bulbs above flickered. His hand trembled as he inserted the key. The door creaked open on its own. Inside, the room looked perfect, immaculate. The bed was neatly made, the furniture antique but spotless. Yet Daniel couldn't shake the feeling that he wasn't alone. He placed his bag down and sat on the edge of the bed. That's when he noticed it. The bathroom door was half open and steam was curling out as if someone had just taken a hot bath. "Hello?" His voice cracked. The sound that came back was not an echo, but a giggle. High-pitched. Female. Heart-pounding, Daniel stepped toward the bathroom. The mirror above the sink was fogged. He swiped his hand across it, revealing his reflection. But there was someone else standing behind him. A woman. Her hair wet, her eyes black as tar, her mouth stretched into a grin that was too wide for a human face. Daniel spun around. Nothing. The bathroom was empty. That night he couldn't sleep. Every time he closed his eyes, he heard footsteps pacing the hallway outside his door. Sometimes soft knocks on the wall, sometimes the faint turning of the doorknob. At 3:17 a.m., the bed shook violently, as though someone had grabbed it from underneath and lifted it. He bolted upright and froze. The woman from the window was sitting in the armchair across the room. Her dress was soaked, leaving a dark wet stain on the carpet. She just stared at him motionless, her grin never faltering. Daniel couldn't move, couldn't breathe. Then she spoke. Her voice was like water gurgling down a drain. "Why did you come here?" Before he could answer, the lights went out. The room was swallowed by darkness. Something wet and cold grabbed his ankle from under the bed. He screamed and kicked free, scrambling for the door, but when he flung it open, the hallway was gone. Instead, there was a long, endless corridor of red carpet stretching into infinity, lined with doors on both sides. At the far end, two small children stood, holding hands, their faces pale, their dresses soaked with blood. "Come play with us," they said, in perfect unison. Daniel ran. The corridor twisted and turned like a maze. Every door he passed flew open, revealing nightmarish visions, people screaming in bathtubs, shadow figures crawling on the ceiling, guests frozen in time with their faces twisted in terror. Finally, he stumbled into the lobby. But it wasn't the same lobby. The chandelier dripped with blood. The piano was playing by itself, a slow, haunting tune. And every chair was now occupied by guests in early 1900s clothing, their eyes all locked on him. The clerk stood behind the desk, her smile wider now, unnatural. checkout time," she whispered. The doors slammed shut. The windows vanished. The building groaned like it was alive. Daniel's scream echoed through the halls of the Stanley Hotel. And then, silence. The next morning, a maid knocked on the door of room 217. No answer. When she entered, the room was spotless, as though no one had stayed there. The bed was made. The bathroom was dry. Only one thing was out of place. Daniel's car was still parked outside. And if you visit the Stanley Hotel today, some guests swear that late at night they see a man in modern clothes standing at the window of room 217, staring out at the parking lot, as though he's still trying to leave. Story No. 2. The wind was screaming that night, rattling the windows of the Stanley Hotel like an angry spirit. Sarah had driven 5 hours from Denver just to spend a weekend here. She was a paranormal blogger, known for hunting down haunted places and staying the night. But tonight something felt different, heavier, darker. As soon as she stepped into the lobby, the clerk barely looked up as she checked in. "Room 401, he said flatly, handing her the key. Sarah smiled nervously. Room 401 was infamous. They said it was once a servant's quarters, where a man had gone mad and locked himself inside for days before disappearing forever. No one knew what happened to him. The elevator creaked as it carried her up to the 4th floor. When the doors opened, the hallway was dimly lit, the light bulbs buzzing faintly. The air felt charged, like before a thunderstorm. She found room 401 at the very end of the corridor. The door looked older than the others, its paint chipped, the number plate tarnished. As soon as she unlocked it, she smelled something strange. Not rot, not mold, but iron. Like blood. The room was small, cozy, almost innocent. A bed, a chair, a small closet. She laughed nervously, setting up her camera gear. "This is it," she said to her phone, recording. "The most haunted room in Stanley Hotel." Hours passed. Nothing happened. Midnight came and she began to grow tired. Then at exactly 12:33 a.m. she heard scratching. Slow, deliberate, from inside the closet. She froze. "Hello," she whispered. The scratching stopped. Then came 3 knocks. Sarah grabbed her phone and turned on the flashlight, pointing it at the closet. Slowly, she reached for the handle and pulled the door open. The closet was empty, but the back wall was different. The wallpaper was peeling away, and carved into the wood beneath were deep scratch marks, like fingernails had clawed at it from the inside. Before she could react, the door slammed shut behind her. She spun around, her heart pounding, but the room was empty. Then she saw something move, a dark shape sliding under the bed. She crouched, phone in hand, and looked. 2 glowing eyes stared back at her. Sarah stumbled back, dropping her phone. The thing under the bed began to crawl out, impossibly thin, its limbs long and crooked like broken branches, its head twisted sideways. It stood up in the corner of the room, its face hidden in shadow. Then it spoke, in a voice that sounded like it came from deep inside the walls. "Do you know what he did to us?" Sarah's mouth went dry. "Whoa, what are you?" The thing tilted its head. "We were here before the hotel. He buried us here, beneath the floor, but we never left." Suddenly, the floorboards beneath her feet began to creak and bulge, as though something was trying to push its way up from under the room. The figure lunged at her, its face finally coming into the light. It had no mouth, no eyes, just raw, torn flesh. Sarah screamed and bolted for the door, yanking it open, but the hallway was gone. Instead, she found herself in a narrow tunnel, the walls made of dirt and bone. The smell of decay was overpowering. Whispers echoed all around her. Hands shot out of the walls, grabbing at her clothes, pulling her deeper. She ran until she saw light ahead, a single lantern hanging from a wooden beam. Beneath it stood a man in a 1900s servant's uniform, his face pale, his hands covered in blood. "They never find the way out," he said softly. "You won't either." Before Sarah could scream, everything went black. The next morning, the maid entered room 401. Sarah's camera was on the bed, still recording. The video showed her sitting on the floor, staring at the closet, whispering to someone who wasn't there. Then, at 3 odd a.m., she simply stood up, walked into the closet, and never came out. Some guests say that if you stay in room 401, you can still hear her voice at night whispering from inside the closet. Please don't open it, don't let them out. Story No. 3. The first snowfall of winter had just begun when Jacob arrived at the Stanley Hotel. He wasn't a ghost hunter or thrill seeker. He was an architect. The hotel had hired him to inspect its foundation after reports of strange vibrations in the West Wing. The manager was oddly quiet as he led Jacob through the hallways, stopping near an old section of the building that had been closed for decades. No one goes past this point anymore, the manager said, but you'll find the source of the problem here, if anywhere. Jacob nodded, flashlight in hand, and ducked under the faded caution tape. The air immediately changed, colder, heavier, like breathing through wet cloth. The hallway beyond was strange, dust everywhere, but no footprints. As he walked, he counted the room numbers: 327, 328, 330. He frowned. Wait, he muttered. Where's 329? Between 328 and 330 was just a blank wall. He knocked on it. The sound was hollow. A shiver ran through him. He pressed his ear to the wall and froze. Someone was breathing on the other side. Jacob stepped back, heart hammering. Then he noticed something he hadn't before. The outline of a door, faint but there, like the wall had been plastered over to hide it. Against his better judgment, he searched the floor until he found a rusted metal latch, half buried in the dust. With a deep breath, he pulled. The wall gave way with a loud crack, revealing a narrow black doorway. Inside was room 329. But it didn't look abandoned. The bed was made, the curtains drawn, a single lamp glowing dimly. The air smelled faintly of flowers. And something else. Something metallic. On the nightstand was an old guest book, open to a page dated 1912. The last entry read, "I can hear them in the walls. If anyone finds this, do not stay. Do not close the door." Jacob's pulse quickened. He looked around the room and saw something horrifying. The wallpaper was covered in hundreds of tiny handprints. Not painted, stained. The lamp flickered. Behind him, the door slammed shut. The temperature dropped instantly. His breath turned white. Then came the sound. A faint dragging like fingernails scraping the floor. It came from under the bed. He crouched, shining his flashlight. A hand shot out, pale, thin. It grabbed the flashlight and yanked it into the darkness. Jacob scrambled back, kicking the bed frame. The dragging sound turned into dozens of footsteps, circling him, though the room appeared empty. The lamp went out. In the darkness, whispering began. Low, overlapping voices, too many to count. Words he couldn't understand. Then, slowly, a figure stepped into view. It wasn't human. Its body was too long, its arms too many, like a centipede made of people. Faces, dozens of them, covered its torso, all whispering, all moving their mouths in unison. Jacob froze, paralyzed by terror. The creature crawled toward him, the faces all grinning now, stretching the skin like wet fabric. One face, a woman's, leaned close to his ear and whispered, "We were walled in. Now you are too." The walls began to close in, literally, the room shrinking, the ceiling lowering. Jacob screamed, clawing at the door, but there was no handle. When the staff came to check hours later, the wall was sealed again. Smooth plaster, no sign of any door. Room 329 no longer existed. But sometimes at night, if you walk that hallway and put your ear to the wall, you can hear it: frantic scratching, muffled screaming, weird, and then silence. Story No. 4. It was off-season at the Stanley Hotel, which meant the halls were mostly empty. Mia loved it that way. She was a travel photographer, and quiet, empty hotels gave her the perfect eerie aesthetic she was always chasing. She checked in at the front desk and the old clerk smiled strangely at her. "Room 212, he said, sliding her the key. "Have I stayed here before?" Mia asked casually. The clerk tilted his head. "You were just here last month," he said softly. Mia frowned. "No, I've never been here before." The clerk just smiled wider, as if he knew something she didn't. Room 212 was at the very center of the second floor. The hallway leading to it was silent, not even the faint hum of electricity. When she unlocked the door, something felt wrong. The bed was turned down. There were fresh flowers on the nightstand, and on the desk sat a Polaroid photograph. It was a picture of Mia. Not a recent selfie, but a candid shot of her sitting on the very same bed she was looking at now. Same clothes, same hairstyle, same expression. Her stomach dropped. She hadn't even unpacked yet. She turned the photo over. 3 words were scrawled on the back. "Welcome back, Mia." She backed out of the room and went straight to the front desk. "Who left this?" she demanded, shoving the photo at the clerk. The clerk's face paled. "Ma'am, I didn't give you room 212. "Yes, you did." He shook his head slowly. "That room's been sealed since 1999. No one has stayed there since..." Before he could finish, the phone on the counter rang. The clerk answered and froze, his face turning ashen. Slowly, he handed the phone to Mia. "It's for you," he whispered. Her hand trembled as she brought it to her ear. "Mia," a voice said. A woman's voice, her own voice. "You shouldn't have come back." The line went dead. Mia ran. Back to room 212, heart pounding, determined to grab her stuff and leave. But when she opened the door this time, the room was different. Dust everywhere, the furniture covered in white sheets, cobwebs hanging from the corners. On the bed lay another photograph. This one showed her lying in the bathtub, her eyes closed, her wrists cut. "No," she whispered, dropping it. The bathroom light flickered on. She turned and saw herself standing in the doorway. Same face, same clothes, except this version of her was smiling. "You didn't make it last time," the double said, "but you can try again." The door slammed shut. The sound of running water filled the bathroom. Mia tried to scream, but no sound came out. Her double grabbed her by the wrist, dragging her toward the tub. "No, let go!" But the grip was cold, stronger than steel. Mia kicked and struggled until her head was forced underwater. She thrashed violently, bubbles rushing up, her lungs screaming for air. And then she woke up. She was lying on the bed in room 212, fully dry, the flowers still fresh on the nightstand. For a moment she thought it had been a nightmare, until she saw the new photograph on the desk. It showed her underwater, eyes wide, mouth open in a silent scream. When the maid entered room 212 the next morning, the bed was neatly made, but in the bathroom mirror there was a wet handprint. And some guests say that if you stay there you can see Mia's reflection, even if you're standing alone. Story No. 5. It was a stormy night when Ethan arrived at the Stanley Hotel. The wind howled through the mountains like a wounded animal, and the parking lot was nearly empty. He was the last guest to check in. The clerk at the desk looked tired, almost frightened when he handed Ethan the key. "Room 303, he said quietly. Ethan nodded, but before he could leave, the clerk added, "Use the stairs, the elevator isn't working tonight." But when Ethan reached the hallway, the elevator doors slid open on their own. Inside, the light was dim, flickering, and the floor was wet, as if someone had just stepped out of a rainstorm. Ethan hesitated, but curiosity got the better of him. He stepped inside and pressed the button for the 3rd floor. The elevator shuddered violently. The light went out for 2 seconds, and when it came back, the floor indicator showed 4. But there was no 4th floor. The doors opened anyway. Instead of a hallway, Ethan stepped into what looked like a massive, empty ballroom, completely dark except for a single chandelier flickering in the distance. The walls were peeling, and the floor was covered in dust thick enough to leave footprints. As he stepped forward, music began to play, an old gramophone tune, warbling and distorted. Then he saw them, figures in ballroom attire, hundreds of them, frozen in mid-dance. They weren't moving, just standing, heads tilted back, mouths open in silent screams. The chandelier flickered once more, and all the figures turned their heads toward Ethan at the same time. He stumbled back, heart pounding, but the elevator doors had closed behind him. The figures began to move now, slowly at first, then faster, rushing toward him without a sound. Their faces were blank, their skin gray, their movements jerky and unnatural. Ethan sprinted across the room, looking for any exit, but there were no doors, no windows, just endless walls. Then, in the far corner, he saw it. Another elevator, its doors standing wide open. He ran for it, breathless, the sound of shuffling feet right behind him. He jumped inside just as the first figure reached out and grabbed the frame of the elevator. The doors closed on its hand, severing it, but instead of falling, the hand crawled on its own, pressing against the glass, leaving a trail of black liquid. The elevator shot downward so fast Ethan thought his stomach would rip out. When it stopped, the doors opened and he was back in the lobby. But something was wrong. The clerk was gone, the lights were out, and the front doors were boarded shut. Behind him, the elevator dinged softly. The doors opened, revealing the ballroom again, this time completely empty, except for one figure, standing in the center. It was Ethan. His double smiled, blood dripping from its fingers, and said, "You finally made it back. Shall we finish the dance?" The doors slammed shut. When the staff came in the next morning, the elevator was out of order, and there were wet footprints leading away from it all the way to room 303. But no guest named Ethan had checked in that night. Story No. 6. It was past midnight when Leah checked into the Stanley Hotel. She had driven straight from Boulder after a long day of filming. She was exhausted, but the strange emptiness of the lobby unsettled her. The clerk barely spoke, simply handed her the key to room 115 and went back to staring at the wall. The hallway felt colder than the lobby. Leah wheeled her suitcase down the carpeted corridor and noticed something odd. There were no mirrors anywhere, no decorative ones, no polished surfaces. When she entered room 115, the first thing she saw was a massive mirror covering one wall. Her reflection stared back at her, tired, pale, with dark circles under her eyes. She freshened up, washed her face, and got ready for bed. But when she turned off the lights, she noticed something strange. The mirror was still reflecting faintly, like there was a light source behind it. She got up, turned on the lamp, and stared. Her reflection was smiling. Leah froze. Her own face in the mirror had a wide grin, teeth bared, but she wasn't smiling. Slowly, the reflection raised its hand and waved at her. Leah stumbled back, heart hammering. The mirror fogged over as though someone was breathing on the other side. Then a single word appeared, written by an invisible finger. "Stay." The lamp flickered and went out. When Leah turned it back on, the reflection was gone. Completely gone. The mirror was empty. Terrified, she grabbed her suitcase and ran for the door. But when she stepped into the hallway, it wasn't the same hallway anymore. It stretched into darkness, the wallpaper peeling, the carpet soaked as if with old water. Behind her, she heard the sound of glass cracking. She turned. The mirror was no longer just a mirror. It was a window. On the other side stood her reflection, grinning wider now, pounding on the glass with both hands. Then the glass shattered. The reflection climbed through, its movements jerky, unnatural, like a puppet. Leah ran down the endless hallway, her footsteps splashing in the wet carpet. Doors began to open as she passed. Inside each room, she saw versions of herself, asleep, screaming, drowning in bathtubs hanging from ceilings. Finally, she reached the lobby, but it was abandoned, covered in dust, chairs overturned as if everyone had left in a hurry decades ago. The front doors were locked. The reflection walked in behind her, its footsteps perfectly in sync with hers. "You were always mine," it said in a voice identical to hers. Leah's scream echoed through the empty hotel. When the maid entered room 115 the next morning, she found the mirror shattered, but no glass on the floor, as if it had fallen through to the other side. And sometimes, late at night, guests say they catch a glimpse of a woman standing inside the mirrors of the Stanley Hotel, silently smiling, waiting to switch places with whoever is looking. Story No. 7. It was snowing heavily when Mark arrived at the Stanley Hotel. The parking lot was almost buried under white powder, and the building stood like a ghost in the storm. Inside, the lobby was strangely silent. The fireplace was cold, no music, no voices. Only a single clerk sat at the desk writing something in a massive leather-bound book. Mark cleared his throat. "I have a reservation for tonight," he said. The clerk didn't look up. "Yes," he whispered. "We've been expecting you." He slid an old-fashioned brass key across the counter, but when Mark picked it up, he noticed the tag didn't have a room number. It just said, "The last room." "I think there's a mistake." "No mistake," the clerk interrupted. "Take the elevator. It will know where to stop." Confused and slightly unnerved, Mark obeyed. When the elevator doors closed, there was no panel, no buttons, and just a single keyhole. His key fit perfectly. The elevator jolted, then began to descend, lower and lower, far below where any basement should have been. When it finally stopped, the doors opened into a vast dining hall lit by hundreds of candles. A long table stretched across the room, set with antique plates, wine glasses filled with something dark and red. Dozens of guests sat silently at the table. Their faces were pale, their clothes dated, early 1900s fashion. None of them moved, none of them blinked. At the far end of the table, an empty chair waited. Mark stepped inside, his breath clouding in the icy air. "Mr. Hale," a voice said. He turned. A tall man in a black suit stood behind him, smiling with perfect white teeth. "Your family has been coming here for generations," the man said. "You are the last one." Mark's chest tightened. I don't understand." "You were always going to end up here," the man continued. "Every guest at this table was the last of their bloodline, and now it's your turn." The guests all turned their heads toward him in perfect unison, their eyes black and hollow. Mark backed toward the elevator, but the doors had vanished. There was only a smooth wall now. "Sit," the man said gently, "or we will make you." Mark ran, knocking over a chair, sprinting for the far corner where he saw another door. But when he opened it, it was just another dining hall. Another table, more guests. Everywhere he turned, there were more rooms, more tables, all filled with silent faces waiting for him to sit down. The candles flickered out one by one, until the entire hall was pitch black. When the lights came back on, there was only one table, and Mark was already sitting at the head of it. In front of him, the guest book lay open. It now bore his name. The next morning, the hotel staff found the elevator doors jammed. When they forced them open, the car was empty, except for a single brass key lying on the floor, the tag reading, "The last room, next guest."